It was a typical Friday evening for Chloe and her friends. They'd just finished watching a movie and decided to play hide and seek in Chloe's house. Chloe was it, and her friends scattered throughout the house to find hiding spots. Chloe searched the house from top to bottom, but she couldn't find her friends. She even searched the cellar, but it was empty. She was about to give up when she heard a faint whisper. It was coming from the corner of the cellar. Curious, Chloe walked towards the corner, but as she approached, the whispering stopped. She looked around, but nobody was there. Suddenly the lights went out, and Chloe was plunged into darkness. Panic set in as Chloe fumbled around for the light switch. Just as she found it, she heard a faint creaking noise. She turned around, and in the dim light, she saw a figure looming in front of her. It was tall and shadowy, with eyes that glowed red in the darkness. Chloe tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was frozen with fear as the figure began to move closer, step by step. Just as it was about to reach her, the lights flickered back on, and the figure disappeared. Shaken, Chloe stumbled upstairs and told her friends what had happened. They laughed it off, saying she was just imagining things. But Chloe knew what she'd seen. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Over the next few weeks, strange things continued to happen in the house. Doors would open and close on their own, and Chloe could hear footsteps in the cellar, even when nobody was there. She started to feel like she was going crazy, and her friends started to distance themselves from her. One night, Chloe decided to confront her fear and go back into the cellar. As she descended the stairs, she felt a cold breeze brush past her, and she could see her breath in the air. The whispering started again, but this time it was louder and more incessant. Chloe followed the sound until she reached a dark corner of the cellar. As she peered into the darkness, she saw a pair of red eyes staring back at her. With a sudden burst of courage, she stepped towards them and reached out to touch. As her hands brushed against the eyes, she felt a cold, slimy hand wrap around her wrist. She screamed and tried to pull away, but the hand was too strong. The whispering grew louder and more intense, and Chloe felt like she was being pulled into the darkness. Just as she thought she was going to be dragged into the abyss, the lights flickered on again, and the hand released her. Chloe stumbled back, gasping for breath, and saw that the cellar was empty once again. From that day on, Chloe never went back into the cellar again. She moved out of the house soon after, but the memory of the cold, slimy hand and the glowing red eyes stayed with her forever. She still wonders what would have happened if the lights hadn't come back on. I can't remember when I started feeling like I was being watched, but it had been going on for weeks. Every time I turned around, I would see something moving out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but as the days went on, I became more and more convinced that something was following me. One night I woke up to a cold chill in the air. The bedroom window was open, even though I'd closed it before going to bed. As I sat up, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was dark and shadowy, but I could feel its presence. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The figure began to move closer, its movements slow and deliberate. As it drew near, I could see that it was covered in blood. Its eyes were empty sockets, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The figure reached out and touched my forehead, and suddenly, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a pool of my own blood. The The figure was nowhere to be seen, but I could feel its presence lingering in the room. I stumbled out of bed and ran to the bathroom, my heart pounding in my chest. As I looked in the mirror, I realized I wasn't alone. There were dozens of faces staring back at me, all twisted in agony. They seemed to be reaching out to me, as if begging for help. I tried to look away, but their eyes held me captive. In a panic, I ran out of the house and into the street, but no matter where I turned, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being followed. I could hear whispers and laughter coming from the shadows, but when I looked, there was no one there. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The faces in the mirror became more and more real, until they were almost tangible. I could feel their breath on my skin, their fingers brushing against my hair. Then one night, I woke up to find myself standing in the middle of the street, covered in blood. I didn't know how I'd gotten there, or what had happened. But as I looked around, I could see dozens of faces staring back at me, their eyes empty, and their mouths twisted in agony. I knew then that I was haunted, and that there was no escape. The faces would follow me wherever I went, and I would be trapped in this nightmare forever. As Maya stumbled through the forest, the darkness enveloped her like a suffocating cloak. The trees swayed and groaned in the howling wind, and the rustling of leaves was the only sound to be heard. She had taken a shortcut to get back to her campsite, but now she had lost her bearings and didn't know which way to go. Suddenly she heard a faint whisper in the darkness, like a voice from the other side. Maya's heart began to race as she tried to pinpoint the source of the sound, but there was no one there, only the trees and the wind. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. Maya could make out the words now, but they didn't make any sense. They were like fragments of a language she had never heard before, twisted, distorted. Then she saw them, a pair of eyes glowing in the darkness like twin flames. They were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Maya tried to run, but her feet wouldn't obey her. She was frozen in place, like a rabbit caught in a hunter's trap. The eyes drew closer, and Maya could see they belonged to a figure, tall and lean, with sharp claws and teeth like knives. It moved with a grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Maya knew without a doubt she was face to face with a monster. The creature lunged at her, its claws tearing at her flesh. Maya screamed, but the sound was drowned out by her own heartbeat. She fought back with all her might, but the monster was too strong, too fast. Just when she thought it was all over, the creature stopped, as if it had lost interest. It turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Maya alone and bleeding in the middle of the forest. Days later, Maya was found by a group of hikers, barely alive. She was taken to the hospital, where she underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage done to her body. Even as she recovered physically, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She began to hear whispers in the darkness, the same twisted language that the monster had spoken. She saw the glowing eyes in her dreams, and sometimes, even when she was awake. She knew that the monster was still out there, waiting for her. Maya tried to convince herself that it was all in her head, that the trauma had caused her mind to play tricks on her. But deep down, she knew that the monster was real. One day, she would have to face it again. It was supposed to be a fun birthday party, but something felt off from the very beginning. The decorations were all in place, the balloons and streamers creating a festive atmosphere. But there was a definite sense of unease. As the guests arrived, they too felt the strangeness of the party. The music was too loud, the laughter too forced, and there was someone missing, the birthday girl herself. As the hours passed, the guests began to notice strange occurrences. Objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut, whispers in the dark corners of the room. They brushed it off as their imagination, but the unease continued to grow. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic set in as the guests fumbled for their phones, trying to find some source of light. And then they heard it, the sound of someone or something moving in the darkness. The guests huddled together, their hearts racing as they tried to make sense of what was happening. Then a voice spoke up out of the darkness, a voice that belonged to no one in the room. "Happy birthday," it said, the words dripping with malice. The guests screamed and ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. The voice continued to taunt them, and they could hear the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the lights came back on. The room was empty, except for a birthday cake, with a strange candle flickering on top. The guests breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was all just a prank. Then, they noticed something strange about the cake. The icing spelled out a message reading, "You're next." As they turned to leave, they saw her, the birthday girl, standing in the corner with a look of pure terror on her face. She'd been missing all night. Now she was here, but she was different somehow. She had a dark, otherworldly aura about her. The guests knew that they had to leave, but the door still wouldn't open. As they huddled together, trying to find a way out, they heard the sound of scratching at the door and a low growl that made their blood run cold. They were trapped with whatever horror had taken over the birthday girl, and they knew that their chances of survival were slim. The birthday party had turned into a nightmare, and there was no escape. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.